Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Israel retrieves first hostage remains after ceasefire. The US government remains shut down. A massive cryptocurrency scam is revealed. Trump secures a bailout in Argentina. Indonesia's visa ban causes international uproar. US military strikes Venezuelan vessels. Pentagon limits press access. UK intensifies sanctions on Russian oil. China asserts claims over Taiwan. Madagascar experiences a military coup. French nationals face spying charges in Iran. Pakistan and the Taliban face rising tensions. Global instability and economic worries are prominent. Trump's temporary ceasefire doesn't guarantee lasting peace. Trump's global strategy is complex and contradictory. Israel returns first 4 hostage bodies following ceasefire agreement. Following a protracted period of uncertainty and negotiations, Israel has successfully retrieved the bodies of 4 deceased hostages: Guy Ilaus, Bipin Joshi, Yossi Sharabi, and Daniel Peretz as part of the ongoing Gaza ceasefire agreement. The retrieval process, facilitated through mediation by international organizations, marks a significant, albeit tentative, step towards releasing the remaining 20 hostages held by Hamas. Initial reports indicate that Ilaus, a sound technician, died from injuries sustained while captive, while Joshi, an agriculture student, perished during the initial months of the conflict after bravely deflecting a grenade. Sharabi, abducted from his home in Kibbutz Be'eri, and Peretz, a captain in the IDF's 7th Armored Brigade, were also recovered. The process has been complicated by the challenging conditions within Gaza, with some of the hostages remains trapped under rubble following Israeli strikes. Hamas has requested the entry of heavy machinery to aid in the recovery efforts. The ceasefire agreement includes a mechanism for exchanging information and intelligence regarding the locations of the remaining remains, managed by the Red Cross. Despite the successful return of the initial 4 bodies, Israel has decided to temporarily close the Rafah border crossing and reduce humanitarian aid deliveries to Gaza until all hostages' remains are recovered. This decision reflects concerns about Hamas's adherence to the agreement and the difficulty of locating the remaining remains. The Red Cross acknowledges the extended time frame anticipated for the search, emphasizing the complexities involved in locating and retrieving human remains. Negotiations continue between the parties through the Red Cross to ensure the swift return of the remaining hostages and their remains. The families of the deceased hostages expressed relief at the return of their loved ones' bodies, while reaffirming their commitment to securing the release of all remaining hostages. The situation remains fluid, with ongoing efforts focused on fulfilling the terms of the ceasefire agreement and achieving a lasting resolution. The government shutdown deepens as negotiations stall. The ongoing U.S. government shutdown continues to escalate, fueled by deep divisions between the Biden administration and Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, with significant ramifications for federal employees and the broader economy. Key to the escalating situation is the administration's continued use of reduction in force. Arif notices to lay off approximately 400 federal employees, a move vehemently opposed by labor unions and Democrats. Initial figures of 101,200 at the Department of Health and Human Services were revised to 982, and a planned 176 layoffs at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were subsequently rescinded. House Speaker Johnson remains steadfast in his position, asserting that President Biden is demanding a Marxist outcome in negotiations, refusing to engage in discussions regarding health insurance subsidies for the Affordable Care Act marketplace. Johnson insists that the shutdown is a deliberate political tactic aimed at forcing concessions. Amidst the stalemate, Representative Hakeem Jeffries stated that Republicans have gone radio silent since the shutdown began, highlighting the lack of communication from the GOP regarding a resolution. The administration's strategy centers on the refs, a tactic intended to pressure Congress into addressing funding gaps. Legal challenges are mounting, with federal employee unions seeking an emergency court order to halt the layoffs, arguing that the administration's actions are unlawful. A federal judge in California is scheduled to hold a major hearing on this matter. Significant revisions have been made to the reported numbers of affected employees. The Department of Energy is issuing general ref notices, with a decision on downsizing pending. 28 ref notices have been issued at the Environmental Protection Agency. The core issue remains the disagreement over funding for the Affordable Care Act, with Republicans demanding a complete overhaul of the program before providing any additional funding. The lack of communication between the two parties is exacerbating the crisis, raising concerns about the potential for a prolonged shutdown and its broader economic consequences. The situation is further complicated by the legal challenges and the administration's continued reliance on refs, creating a tense and uncertain environment. A 14 billion Bitcoin seizure unmasks massive cryptocurrency scam. US and UK authorities have seized over 14 billion in Bitcoin as part of a crackdown on a sprawling cryptocurrency scam orchestrated by Cambodian businessman Chen Jai, founder of the Prince Group. The operation, involving forced labor camps in Cambodia, targeted thousands of victims worldwide through sophisticated investment schemes. The Justice Department alleges Chen Jai masterminded a transnational criminal organization that operated at least 10 scam compounds, employing over 250 mobile phones to conduct automated call center scams and manage 76,000 social media accounts. The Prince Group, engaged in property development and financial services, utilized these camps to lure victims through messaging apps and social media, often feigning emergencies or employing romance scams. Victims were encouraged to invest further after being presented with fabricated profits, ultimately resulting in the theft of millions of dollars. The group's tactics included instructing laborers not to use too beautiful profile photos to create a more authentic appearance. Authorities uncovered a network of bribery involving public officials in China and elsewhere to evade investigations and maintain operations. The illicit proceeds funded extravagant purchases, including a $3 million yacht for a foreign government official and a Picasso painting acquired through a New York auction house. A parallel investigation by U.S. authorities led to the seizure of an additional $15 billion in cryptocurrency, also linked to the pig butchering scheme. This represents the largest forfeiture action in the Justice Department's history. The scheme utilized forced labor camps to generate cryptocurrency investment opportunities. Victims were contacted online, often through deceptive means, and convinced to transfer funds based on false promises of investment returns. The operation involved a complex network of scammers operating from compounds along the Myanmar-Thailand border, utilizing automated call centers staffed by laborers subjected to forced labor. The FBI is actively investigating these schemes, urging individuals to be wary of online investment opportunities and to report suspicious activity. Law enforcement officials emphasize the devastating impact of these scams, citing cases of individuals losing their lives due to financial ruin. The ongoing investigation highlights the growing threat of cryptocurrency-related fraud and the need for increased vigilance and proactive measures to combat these illicit activities. Trump's Argentina bailout, a strategic play amid economic turmoil. Recent news articles detail Donald Trump's administration's provision of a $20 billion currency swap to Argentina, a move heavily influenced by the country's economic instability and the upcoming midterm elections. This intervention is predicated on supporting Argentine libertarian President Javier Milei, who has implemented austerity measures and free market reforms, aligning with Trump's own political philosophy. The primary motivation behind the bailout is to bolster Milei's electoral prospects ahead of Argentina's October 26 legislative elections. The swap, essentially alone, aims to stabilize Argentina's currency, which had been plummeting due to Milei's policies and a significant defeat in recent elections. Critics, including members of Congress like Senator John Shaheen, express concern about the use of taxpayer dollars, particularly during a U.S. government shutdown and amidst anxieties about rising inflation and hiring challenges. Trump views the arrangement as a strategic opportunity, emphasizing the formation of an economic bridge with allies who share similar values. He sees Milei as a key figure in countering China's influence in South America, given Argentina's significant mineral deposits, including lithium and copper, crucial for U.S. manufacturing. However, the bailout has generated considerable controversy. Concerns have been raised about potential retribution from China, particularly regarding soybean purchases, a major point of contention due to Trump's previous trade war policies. Internal disagreements within the Trump administration, revealed through text messages, further complicate the situation. Despite these criticisms, Trump remains steadfast in his support for Milei, viewing the arrangement as a calculated move to strengthen a strategic ally. He has issued veiled threats against China over soybean purchases and other trade elements. The decision underscores Trump's prioritization of aligning with like-minded leaders globally, even if it faces domestic opposition and geopolitical complexities. The situation is further complicated by the timing coinciding with the U.S. government shutdown and concerns about economic indicators. The exchange is viewed as an attempt to bolster a key ally while navigating potential trade tensions and domestic economic anxieties. Indonesia's visa ban sparks international controversy. The international sporting community is grappling with a significant controversy following Indonesia's decision to deny visas to the Israeli Gymnastics Federation team, preventing their participation in the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships. This action has been widely condemned as setting a dangerous precedent for the future of sports. The Indonesian government's refusal, rooted in its strong support for Palestinians amid the ongoing conflict in Gaza, has triggered a cascade of repercussions. The Israel Gymnastics Federation, IGF, lodged appeals with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, seeking urgent measures to guarantee participation, or, alternatively, to move or cancel the event. However, CAS rejected these appeals, citing the International Gymnastics Federation's fugly assertion that it possesses no authority over Indonesia's visa policies, deeming the decision outside the organization's competence. The IGF expressed deep concern, fearing this action could escalate into a broader trend, potentially impacting any sport or competition globally. Secretary General Sarat Shinar highlighted the risk of this situation becoming a recurring pattern, fueled by political pressures. The situation underscores the growing intersection of geopolitical tensions and international sporting events. The dispute centers around Indonesia's long-standing policy of refusing to host Israeli sports delegations for major events. Despite assurances from Indonesian officials in July, confirming a welcoming reception, the government maintained its stance. Artem Dolgopiet, a defending world floor champion and Olympic gold medalist, is among the affected athletes, casting doubt on his participation. CAS rejected the IGF's request for the FIG to take note of the Indonesian government's statement, further solidifying the Indonesian government's position. The situation represents a significant challenge for the FIG and highlights the complexities of balancing diplomatic considerations with the rights of athletes. The controversy reflects the wider global backlash against Israel regarding the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, extending into the realms of sports and cultural events. U.S. continues military strikes against vessels off Venezuelan coast. The United States has conducted another military strike against a vessel operating off the coast of Venezuela, resulting in the deaths of 6 individuals. President Donald Trump announced the operation, asserting the targeted vessel was affiliated with a designated terrorist organization and was trafficking narcotics along a known route. This marks the 5th such strike under the Trump administration, totaling 27 deaths, and has intensified international scrutiny regarding the legality and justification of these actions. Intelligence reports confirm the vessel's involvement in illicit narco-terrorist networks, but details regarding the specific organization and evidence remain scarce. The Pentagon's determination that the U.S. is engaged in an armed conflict with drug cartels, as outlined in a letter to Congress, has fueled debate and raised concerns about potential escalation. Despite these assertions, evidence of an imminent threat from the vessel is lacking, with reports indicating it had already turned around prior to the strike. This raises questions about the administration's rationale and the potential for unintended consequences. Republican Senator Rand Paul has actively opposed these strikes, co-sponsoring a war powers resolution to prevent unilateral presidential action. He argues that such strikes risk escalation and regime change efforts. Vice President J.D. Vance has publicly celebrated the strikes, a position criticized by Senator Paul. The strikes are further exacerbating tensions between the U.S. and Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who is considering a state of emergency. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent advocates for economic bridges with allies, suggesting a more constructive approach than military intervention. The U.S. continues to position these strikes as self-defense, but legal challenges and international condemnation persist. The ongoing situation highlights a complex geopolitical struggle involving drug trafficking, regional security, and the limits of presidential power. The administration's strategy faces considerable opposition within the U.S. government and raises serious questions about the long-term implications of this approach. The Pentagon restricts press access amidst growing controversy and pushback. The Department of Defense, under Secretary Pete Hegseth, has implemented new restrictions on Pentagon press access, sparking significant backlash from major news outlets and raising concerns about press freedom. The policy mandates that journalists must obtain prior authorization from the DoD before reporting on any information, even unclassified material, and threatens credential revocation for non-compliance. This follows a shift in policy initiated by the Trump administration and continues under current leadership. Several prominent news organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the Associated Press, Reuters, The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, and many others, have rejected the new guidelines, citing a potential infringement on their ability to report on national security issues. The Pentagon Press Association has strongly condemned the policy as unprecedented intimidation, arguing it discourages open communication and could be interpreted as criminalizing journalistic inquiry. President Donald Trump has voiced his support for the restrictions, characterizing the press as very dishonest and expressing concern that military personnel might inadvertently reveal sensitive information. Secretary Hegseth defended the policy as common sense stuff, designed to protect classified information and prevent reporters from roaming around the Pentagon. Furthermore, the DoD has implemented a new rotation program, removing dedicated office space for some news outlets and allotting it to right-leaning organizations such as the New York Post, One America News Network, Breitbart News Network, and HuffPost News. This move has intensified criticism of the department's actions. Responding to these developments, former Biden administration Pentagon press Secretary John Kirby offered a measured reaction, highlighting the importance of maintaining open communication channels between the press and the military. The core issue revolves around the DoD's assertion that safeguarding classified information outweighs the traditional role of the press in holding the military accountable. The ongoing conflict between the Pentagon and the media underscores fundamental tensions regarding transparency, national security, and the public's right to know. The shift in policy, coupled with the associated restrictions and the removal of dedicated office space, represents a significant challenge to journalistic freedom and access to information within the Department of Defense. UK intensifies sanctions targeting Russian oil and global facilitators. The United Kingdom has significantly escalated its sanctions campaign against Russia, primarily focusing on disrupting its oil industry and targeting countries aiding its access to global markets. The core strategy involves imposing stringent measures on Russian oil giants, most notably Rosneft, which accounts for nearly half of all Russian oil production, and Lukoil. These sanctions aim to cripple Russia's ability to finance the ongoing war in Ukraine. Alongside targeting Russian firms, the UK is broadening its scope to include companies in third countries, specifically India's Nayara Energy Limited, which imported over 100 million barrels of Russian crude oil valued at over $5 billion in 2024. The government is also pursuing sanctions against 4 Chinese oil terminals and a major Indian refinery. Furthermore, the UK is targeting Russia's Shadow Fleet, a network of oil tankers with 44 vessels now subject to sanctions. This action is designed to cut off Russia's ability to transport oil covertly. The government asserts that there is no place for Russian oil on global markets and will take all necessary actions to achieve this. These intensified sanctions align with broader international efforts, including those spearheaded by the Group of Sevens, G7 nations. The G7 is considering a plan to seize hundreds of billions of dollars in frozen Russian investment proceeds. A significant portion of these assets are held at the European Central Bank. The UK's actions mirror previous sanctions against Gazprom Neft and Surgutneftegas. The Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper emphasized that each ruble seized will contribute to saving Ukrainian lives. The US has also discussed imposing tariffs on Chinese goods linked to Beijing's purchases of Russian oil, contingent on European cooperation. The US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated that this measure would only be implemented if European partners joined in. The continued funding needs of Ukraine, particularly in terms of arms and reconstruction, remain a critical factor driving these sanctions efforts. The goal is to systematically dismantle Russia's war effort and support Ukraine's resilience. China seizes maps reflecting disputed Taiwan claims. Chinese customs officials in Shandong province recently seized a shipment of 60,000 maps intended for export, citing concerns over their depiction of Taiwan. The seizure highlights the ongoing tensions surrounding China's territorial claims, particularly in the South China Sea. Customs officers determined the maps were problematic due to their misrepresentation of Taiwan, which Beijing considers a province and a core interest. The maps were also criticized for omitting key islands within the South China Sea, an area where China's claims overlap with those of the Philippines and Vietnam. A central element of the controversy revolves around the absence of the 9-dash line, a contentious demarcation tool used by Beijing to assert sovereignty over nearly the entire South China Sea. This line, comprised of 9 dashes extending from Hainan province, is a significant factor in China's maritime disputes. Furthermore, the maps failed to accurately represent the maritime boundary between China and Japan, adding to the perceived misrepresentation of China's position. The seizure underscores the sensitivity surrounding Taiwan's status, as China has repeatedly stated it will not rule out the use of force to reunify the island with the mainland. Taiwan, conversely, maintains its distinct political identity and democratic governance. Recent incidents, such as a confrontation between Chinese and Philippine vessels involving water cannon and alleged ramming, further illustrate the volatile situation in the South China Sea. These disputes continue to fuel international concern and diplomatic efforts to resolve the complex territorial claims. The map's failure to accurately reflect China's position on Taiwan and the South China Sea underscores the strategic importance of this region and the potential for further escalation. The incident serves as a reminder of the deep-seated geopolitical issues at play. Madagascar military seizes power amidst political turmoil. A military unit, CAP-SAT, led by Col Michael Randrianarina, has declared itself in control of Madagascar following weeks of widespread protests. President Andry Rajoelina, who had been in power since 2009, is currently reported to be in a safe place, following alleged attempts on his life by military personnel and politicians. CAP-SAT has announced the formation of a government and plans to hold elections within 2 years, while also suspending key democratic institutions, including the Electoral Commission. The movement began with youth-led protests against chronic water and power cuts, escalating into broader dissatisfaction with Rajoelina's government due to issues like unemployment, corruption, and the cost of living crisis. The unrest resulted in at least 22 deaths and over 100 injuries, according to the UN. Although the Malagasy government disputes these figures, CAP-SAT, which supported Rajoelina during his previous term, joined the protests on Saturday. The Constitutional Court has officially recognized Col Randrianarina as the country's new leader, despite Rajoelina's denial of the situation as an attempted coup d'état. Rajoelina attempted to dissolve the National Assembly before an impeachment vote could occur, but this was unsuccessful, with 130 lawmakers voting to impeach him. The African Union has strongly condemned the military's actions, warning against meddling in Madagascar's political affairs and rejecting any attempt at unconstitutional changes of government. French President Emmanuel Macron has also expressed concerns about the situation. Madagascar, one of the world's poorest nations with 75% of its population living below the poverty line, has experienced a series of political upheavals in recent years. The protests were largely fueled by discontent with Rajoelina's leadership and the country's persistent economic challenges. The military's intervention marks a significant shift in Madagascar's political landscape, raising concerns about the future of democracy and stability on the island nation. The situation remains fluid and uncertain, with international observers urging a peaceful resolution in line with the constitutional order. French pair sentenced in Iran on spying charges for 2 French nationals, Cecil Kohler, 40, and Jacques Paris, 72, have been handed lengthy prison sentences in Iran following their conviction on espionage charges. The pair, the only French citizens currently detained in the country, were arrested in May 2022 during a tourist trip and have been held in pre-trial detention ever since. Iranian state media reports that they were found guilty of spying on behalf of both France and Israel. The sentences vary significantly. One defendant received a 6-year prison term for spying on France, 5 years for conspiracy against national security, and a 20-year exile sentence for intelligence cooperation with Israel. The other defendant received a 10-year prison sentence for spying on France, 5 years for conspiracy against national security, and a 20-year exile for complicity in intelligence cooperation with Israel. Iranian law allows for concurrent sentencing, and the specifics of the exile punishment remain unclear, though past instances have involved relocation to remote areas. The verdict is subject to appeal within 20 days, following which their pretrial detention will be deducted. France has strongly criticized the detention as arbitrary and alleges conditions akin to torture. This situation mirrors a broader pattern of detaining foreign nationals, often used as leverage in diplomatic negotiations. Several other Europeans are currently being held, including a British couple, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, who were detained while traveling by motorcycle and face espionage charges. The Foreman's family maintains their innocence and reports horrific conditions of detention. Recent releases include 18-year-old French-German cyclist Lennart Mannerlos, who was acquitted of espionage charges last week. The cases underscore a recurring theme in international relations, with the release of foreign nationals contingent upon settlements or concessions, as exemplified by the UK's payment of a $400 million debt to secure the freedom of British-Iranian nationals Zaghari Ratcliffe and Anoushi Ashuri. Iran currently holds approximately 20 Europeans in detention, highlighting a complex and contentious diplomatic landscape. The ongoing detention of Mahdi Afendiari, held in France, further complicates the situation, with Iran repeatedly asserting her detention is arbitrary. Tensions escalate between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban. Recent days have witnessed a significant escalation of violence along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, marked by deadly clashes and reciprocal accusations between the Pakistani military and the Afghan Taliban. The conflict began with reports of Pakistani airstrikes targeting Kabul and Kandahar, followed by explosions within Kabul and Kandahar, which the Taliban blamed on Pakistani actions. These events shattered a fragile period of relative calm. Both sides engaged in fierce fighting, particularly in the Spin Boldak border district, leading to casualties on both sides. The Pakistani military claimed to have killed between 15 and 20 Afghan Taliban fighters and inflicted injuries, while the Taliban government reported the deaths of numerous Pakistani soldiers. Intense clashes persisted for almost 5 hours in Spin Boldak, involving drones and jets, resulting in injuries and the displacement of hundreds of families. The fighting has been accompanied by a concerted effort by both sides to shape public perception through social media, highlighting the extent of damage inflicted by their respective actions. The conflict's roots lie in long-standing accusations by Pakistan that the Afghan Taliban permits the Pakistani Taliban to operate from Afghan territory, aiming to establish a strict Islamic government. The Taliban consistently denies these allegations. International concern has grown, with China, Russia, and the United States calling for de-escalation. UN Special Rapporteur Richard Bennett expressed deep concern regarding civilian casualties and displacement, urging all parties to exercise restraint and adhere to international law. The clashes have resulted in confirmed deaths and injuries, as well as significant displacement of families and the reported presence of drones and jets in the affected areas. The situation remains tense, with ongoing reports of further clashes and a continued struggle for control along the border. Global tensions and economic concerns dominate news landscape. The current global news cycle is dominated by escalating tensions in Gaza, economic anxieties within the UK, and geopolitical shifts. Israel's decision to halve aid entering Gaza has triggered concerns about the fragile ceasefire and the withholding of hostage bodies by Hamas, with reports of executions of suspected collaborators. Simultaneously, the UK faces a challenging economic outlook, with unemployment at a 4-year high, wage growth slowing, and inflation predicted to remain the highest among major economies, prompting warnings of a potential recession. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is under pressure ahead of the upcoming budget. Within the UK, political tensions are also high. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood is preparing to address a summit of Balkan interior ministers, asserting the UK's loss of control over its borders and highlighting the erosion of trust in political leadership. The Council of Europe has expressed concerns regarding the government's policies on trans rights and banning Palestine action, potentially straining relations with the European Convention on Human Rights. Reform UK and the Conservatives both seek to distance themselves from this situation. The COVID inquiry continues to generate controversy, with former Education Secretary Gavin Williamson admitting the phased return to school was destined to fail and damaging for children and parents, further fueling criticism of Boris Johnson's leadership. Williamson also revealed the decision to shut schools was made in just 24 hours. Geopolitically, the U.S. Treasury Secretary warns of China's attempts to harm the world economy through export controls on rare earths and critical minerals. Furthermore, reports indicate a military coup in Madagascar, with President Andry Rajoelina fleeing the country. The Daily Mirror highlights Williamson's admissions regarding the school closures. The Daily Star and the Times report on the revelations from the COVID inquiry. The Express publishes a quote from an unnamed politician referencing the career of Sir Humphrey Atkins. The Guardian continues to report on the situation in Gaza. The Financial Times covers the ongoing tensions between the U.S. and China. The Sun alleges taxpayer funding for art classes and puzzle rooms in immigration centers. Trump's brief intervention yields temporary ceasefire, but long-term peace remains distant. Donald Trump's rapid diplomatic intervention facilitated a ceasefire and hostage exchange between Israel and Hamas, though experts emphasize this is a temporary measure and not a pathway to lasting peace in the Middle East. The agreement, brokered during a visit to Israel and Egypt, involved Israel's acceptance of terms initially resisted by Prime Minister Netanyahu and a subsequent exchange of hostages and prisoners. However, the core framework, a demilitarized and governed Gaza under a committee chaired by Trump, remains unfulfilled, highlighting the significant gaps that need to be addressed. The agreement's success is largely attributed to Trump's demand for Netanyahu's agreement, shifting the dynamic away from Israel's uncompromising stance. Despite this, underlying political will for a comprehensive peace remains lacking, mirroring the conditions that often conclude wars. The fragility of the ceasefire is evident, with initial cracks appearing due to Hamas's limited return of hostage bodies, citing the extensive destruction in Gaza and Israel's retaliatory threat to halve aid flow and close the Rafah crossing. The IDF's continued occupation of a significant portion of Gaza and its use of imaginary lines and warning shots demonstrate a persistent approach to crowd control, raising concerns about potential escalations. Simultaneously, Hamas is reasserting its authority, engaging in clashes with rival armed clans and carrying out extrajudicial killings, signaling defiance and reinforcing its control. Diplomatic efforts are focused on finalizing the details of the framework, recognizing the urgency of the situation. However, disagreements persist, particularly regarding the implementation of the demilitarization plan. The situation is further complicated by Israel's punitive measures, threatening to undermine the ceasefire. The return of the bodies of the hostages remains a critical issue, with potential ramifications for the continuation of the agreement. The current arrangement represents a tactical pause, not a strategic resolution, to the deeply entrenched conflict. Trump's global ambitions and contradictions. Recent reporting highlights Donald Trump's increasingly interventionist foreign policy, marked by significant contradictions, with his established America First rhetoric and mega-base expectations. The president's actions demonstrate a desire for global influence, economic advantage, and personal prestige, often prioritizing personal deals and political favors over traditional U.S. foreign policy. Trump's attempts to reshape the Middle East, particularly through brokering a ceasefire and hostage return deal between Israel and Hamas, are juxtaposed with his threat to disarm Hamas, raising concerns about potential U.S. military involvement and a departure from established policy. His offer of a $20 billion economic bailout to Argentina, contingent on the election of right-wing President Javier Milei, exemplifies this pattern, prioritizing political leverage over economic aid. The president's actions regarding Venezuela, including military strikes against alleged drug cartel targets, reflect a broader strategy to counter China's influence and address the fentanyl crisis, despite criticism that these actions constitute extrajudicial killings. Trump's interventions are frequently driven by a pursuit of geopolitical power and economic access, notably regarding lithium and copper deposits in Argentina. Despite these actions, Trump continues to employ a chaotic and seemingly unfocused approach, often prioritizing personal grievances and political maneuvering over coherent strategic goals. His attempts to influence foreign elections, such as the bailout offer to Argentina, are viewed as blatant interference, while Trump's success in mediating the Israel-Hamas conflict offers a traditional foreign policy win. The potential for U.S. military involvement in Gaza raises significant concerns among his supporters, potentially straining the relationship with his base. Throughout his actions, Trump's foreign policy appears to be shaped by a desire to reshape the Western Hemisphere and to assert American dominance against rivals like China. This strategy is underpinned by a transactional approach, often prioritizing personal gain and political advantage over established diplomatic norms. The president's actions demonstrate a willingness to disregard conventional wisdom and established alliances in pursuit of his own objectives, creating a volatile and unpredictable global landscape. His approach is characterized by a constant tension between his stated principles and his actual behavior, leading to a complex and often contradictory foreign policy.